On an airless August night in 1856, the Reverend Alaric Bell vanished from the locked study of Morhaven's grandest church, St. Sylvester's Cathedral. All that remained was his blood-splattered prayer book and a chilling handwritten note. The flock has offered its tithe. The blood pact must be fulfilled. For 70 years, the Morhaven diocese sealed every record tied to that night. No sermons were ever printed, no obituary published. The vestry minutes were scrubbed clean, but a cache of hidden letters, uncovered during a failed estate sale, has peeled back the veil. What they reveal isn't simply a missing man. It's the slow suffocation of a town's soul by the very men it trusted most. Bell wasn't just a preacher. He was the preacher, counselor to slave barons, private confidant of senators, and the unspoken priest to Alabama's wealthiest families. His Sunday sermons drew crowds from Mobile and Montgomery, but what the pews couldn't see, the quiet transactions behind closed doors, the late-night visits from grim-faced elites, would unravel Morhaven like threads soaked in blood. The investigation? A travesty. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence was misfiled. 3 of Bell's closest vestrymen, all patriarchs of Morhaven's oldest dynasties, oversaw the inquiry and then left town within days. One fled to Cuba. Another drowned under unclear circumstances. The third was later committed to an asylum after screaming for days about red altars and bones that speak. The truth, long buried beneath cryptic church donations and shuttered family mausoleums, was far darker than the pious facade allowed. The night Reverend Bell vanished, something ancient was awakened in St. Sylvester's, and it was hungry. What had once been whispered as local superstition, dark rites held beneath the cathedral, blood seals between men of God and men of power, now stand supported by records, written in shaking hands. Morhaven's elite had made a pact. And Bell? He was never its leader. He was its offering. In 1856, Morhaven, Alabama, was a crown jewel of the southern frontier, a city of iron gates, oil lamps, and polished facades. Cotton flowed like water through its riverside docks, and slaves outnumbered free men 3-1. It was a city where appearances were gospel and secrets were currency. St. Sylvester's Cathedral stood at the city's heart, its Gothic spires stabbing skyward like silent accusers. Built in 1849 from local stone and Yankee money, the church had been funded by the Holloways, the Orvals, and the Kittredges, 3 families who controlled nearly every bank, mill, and courthouse in Morhaven. The cathedral had no parish council. It had a board of trustees, and those trustees never missed a midnight vote. Reverend Alaric Bell had arrived in Morhaven just 3 years before his disappearance, transferred from a failing congregation in Norfolk, Virginia. The circumstances were vague. A scandal involving a senator's daughter and whispered hints of theology too extreme had hastened his exit. Still, his credentials were impeccable, fluent in Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, with connections to Anglican bishops in New York and London. When Bell first walked into St. Sylvester's, the town paused to look. 6'3", pale as limestone, with a mane of silver hair and a voice that crackled like thunder behind stained glass. Women wept when he read from Psalms. Men swore he could read their sins just by passing a hand across their shoulder. He spoke not of fire and damnation, but of debt, spiritual debts, family debts, blood debts. His sermons, some later found scribbled in charcoal behind pews, were hypnotic. You may live pure, but your grandfather's sins ride your spine. You cannot sweat them off. They must be paid, in flesh or in legacy. Soon the confessionals were full, not with the poor, but with the powerful. Judges, planters, and aldermen came knocking not just for prayer, but for protection. Because Bell offered more than forgiveness. He offered containment. He knew how to seal a sin so deep it couldn't even scream. But with every week, his gaze grew colder, his sermons more cryptic. Parishioners reported strange symbols hidden in the margins of his scripture. He replaced communion wine with imported sacramental brands no one recognized. And some nights, when the bells struck midnight, neighbors claimed the cathedral lights flickered, though no one had gone in. Then came the August heat, the fever, and the ritual. By midsummer, Reverend Bell's influence had seeped into every corridor of Morhaven's ruling class. What began as spiritual counsel had become something far more potent and far more dangerous. Behind the walls of St. Sylvester's, a private fellowship had formed. It wasn't printed in any church bulletin. There were no rosters, no records, but its presence was undeniable. It began innocuously. A few wealthy men met with Bell after Vespers for extended prayer. But soon, these gatherings stretched into the early hours. The church secretary, Lydia Mornell, once found half-melted candle wax in the shape of a 12-pointed star behind the pulpit. She said nothing. She had been warned not to pry. The core members of Bell's inner circle became easily identifiable by their absence from public life. Once prolific in courtrooms and markets, they now appeared pale, withdrawn, and wary. Judge Percival Orval, known for his iron grip over Morhaven's legal system, suddenly began deferring to Bell on moral judgments. He stopped hearing certain types of cases, particularly those involving disappearances among the city's poor. Bennett Holloway, heir to the Holloway shipping empire, visited the cathedral nearly every evening, his boots dusty from long rides and his collar always soaked with sweat. His younger brother claimed Bennett hadn't slept at home in over a month. "He prays more than he breathes," he once muttered. "But I don't think it's God he's praying to." And then there was Dr. Lucien Halbrook, the city's only trained surgeon and a man once respected across the South for his pioneering work on nerve pain. After joining Bell's confidants, Halbrook closed his clinic without explanation. Rumors swirled that he had been seen wheeling covered stretchers into the church at night. No one ever saw patients come out. What Bell had offered them is still unclear. Protection, power, a clean ledger of sins for men drowning in ancestral guilt. What is known is this: they were bound to him, not through faith, but through something older, bloodier, and utterly unholy. One summer evening, Lydia was asked to deliver a sealed letter to Bell's quarters. She opened the wrong door by mistake. Inside, she glimpsed a single candle, a large book bound in scarlet leather, and 12 black robes hanging like corpses from iron hooks. She never returned to the cathedral again. August 23, 1856 began like any other blistering summer day in Morhaven. The heat clawed at the windows, too heavy to breathe. The sun glared down like a punishment, and even the flies moved slower, too drunk on the humidity to buzz. But there was something else in the air, something brittle, electric. People described it later as the kind of tension that creeps through your bones before a lightning strike. Reverend Bell spent most of the day in seclusion. He declined visitors, canceled the evening hymn practice, and requested that the church be locked precisely at sundown. Lydia Mornell, who had reluctantly returned to her post after 2 weeks of unexplained absence, noted that Bell seemed distant. Distracted, yes, but also exhilarated. Like a man who already knows how the story ends. she wrote later in a letter to her sister. That evening, just after 7 p.m., 3 men arrived at St. Sylvester's through the east transept door. They entered one at a time, in silence, and without their usual pomp. Judge Orvale, Dr. Halbrook, and Bennett Holloway, each pale, each carrying something. Orvale held a thick ledger. Halbrook's physician's bag sagged under unknown weight, and Holloway bore a wooden case with an iron lock. The bells rang once at 8 o'clock, standard for the Vespers hour, but then they rang again at 8:17. No one could explain why. There was no hand on the rope, no gust of wind, and yet the bells groaned through the city, each note flat and low like a warning call. Inside the cathedral, Lydia, who had hidden herself behind the heavy curtain in the vestry, heard voices rising in Reverend Bell's study, not arguments, but pleading. At one point she heard Holloway say, "We didn't agree to this, Alaric. Not with our lives, not with our souls." Bell's voice followed, steady and cold. "Your lives were offered the moment you entered the circle. Your souls were spent the moment you benefited from the covenant. Now comes payment." At 9 o'clock, the voices fell silent. Lydia peeked from the curtain just in time to see the 3 men exit the study, drenched in sweat, eyes wide, faces white as wax. Not one of them spoke, and none of them ever returned. She waited 30 minutes. Then, shaking, she approached Bell's door. What she heard behind it did not belong to this world. Lydia Mornell stood before the study door, hands trembling, a cold sweat beading beneath her collar despite the choking heat. The great oak slab loomed before her like the entrance to a tomb, not just locked, but sealed. She pressed her ear against the wood and heard chanting, faint, rhythmic, and in no language she recognized. It wasn't Latin. Lydia had attended Catholic school. These were syllables twisted like serpents, sliding over each other with a cadence that made her stomach churn. And it wasn't just one voice. Bell's was the anchor, low, deliberate, commanding. But there were others answering, dozens, maybe more. And she knew he was alone in that room. The air grew unnaturally cold near the door. The brass knob stung her fingers with a chill that seemed to hum. Her candle flickered violently before extinguishing altogether, leaving her in shadow. Something told her to run. Something deeper told her to stay and witness. The chanting stopped. For several heartbeats, the church was silent. Then, a single sound, the scratch of a quill on parchment, slow, deliberate strokes. Bell was writing. She leaned in again, and what she heard made her heart seize. "The flock has offered its tithe. The blood pact must be fulfilled. Through me, they will ascend." It wasn't Bell's voice. It was lower, older, as if something was speaking through him. She fled. At dawn, Lydia returned with the sexton, Mr. Amos Greeley, a wiry man of 68 who'd served the church longer than Bell had been alive. He knocked, called, prayed, nothing. Eventually, he retrieved his keys and tried the lock. It wouldn't budge, not rusted, refused. When the door finally creaked open after Greeley forced it with a crowbar, the room was empty. Bell was gone. The window shutters were latched from the inside. The fireplace was cold. The room smelled faintly of iron and lavender. On the desk sat his Bible, opened to Leviticus 17. "For the life of the flesh is in the blood." Its pages were soaked in fresh blood that had not yet dried. Beside it, a single note written in Bell's unmistakable script, but in deep dark red ink that glistened unnaturally. The congregation demands its tithe. The covenant is not broken. I simply go ahead. No body, no struggle, no escape. Just blood and silence. Word of Reverend Bell's disappearance spread through Morhaven like a sickness. By noon, the cathedral was cordoned off, its great wooden doors sealed with chains, not by police order, but by the church board itself. Judge Orvale was suddenly indisposed. Dr. Halbrook had already left the city, citing an urgent family matter. And Bennett Holloway boarded a steamer down the Tennessee River that very night. None of them ever gave a public statement. None were ever seen in Morhaven again. Inside Bell's study, the details only deepened the unease. The blood-stained Bible was not the only item on the desk. There was a silver chalice, one that hadn't been used for communion in years, sitting beside a glass vial half filled with a thick, blackish-red fluid. Amos Greeley, a devout Baptist who had never feared anything but fire, reportedly muttered, "This ain't wine," before covering it with a cloth. Worse still were the drawers. None had been rifled through, yet every one was open, their contents meticulously sorted on the floor in neat semicircles. Personal letters grouped by recipient. Financial ledgers bound in red twine sorted by quarter. Envelopes, dozens, addressed to prominent families in Morhaven, all sealed in wax, each marked with a sigil none could decipher. A circle, bisected by a dagger, flanked by what appeared to be goat horns. But the centerpiece of the room was a rug. A Persian tapestry that had always rested under Bell's chair was rolled back, revealing a perfect circle of dried blood etched into the floorboards. Inside it, 12 burnt-down candles, fragments of bone, and a scorch mark in the shape of a man. Arms extended, head bowed, as if kneeling. The smell in the room was not decay, but ozone. Like the air after a storm, the air was colder than anywhere else in the building, and the flickering gas lamps along the hall would not stay lit. Within days, the church vestry met in secret. Their conclusion was swift. Bell had suffered a breakdown due to overwork and illness, and fled the city in shame. The blood? A self-inflicted injury, they said. The symbols? Artistic nonsense. The public was told Reverend Alaric Bell had departed for Virginia on emergency family business. No train tickets, no witnesses, no trace. Just a locked room, a trail of blood, and a covenant no one dared to name. In the weeks following Bell's vanishing, the men most closely tied to him seemed to unravel, or vanish themselves. Judge Percival Orval, once the unwavering gavel of Morhaven's court, was last seen walking barefoot through the courthouse gardens, mumbling scripture while tearing pages from his own law books. He was quietly escorted to a private sanitarium in Savannah by his brother-in-law. When asked by a reporter for the Morhaven Watch, the family claimed nervous exhaustion. He died there 9 months later. His final words, according to the attending nurse, were, "The blood doesn't dry, it just waits." Dr. Lucien Halbrook's home was found abandoned, its doors open, every mirror shattered. Neighbors said he had been acting strangely, digging in his garden late at night, burning old books, wearing gloves in the summer heat. A receipt showed he booked passage to Marseille, France. But ship manifests confirm he never boarded. His horse was found tied to a tree 5 miles outside town, saddlebags full of anatomy texts, and a single blood-stained robe. Bennett Holloway's departure was even more abrupt. He left behind his wife, 2 children, and an estate worth nearly $500,000, more than any man in Morhaven at the time. The servants said he packed a single trunk and fled before dawn, leaving a note that simply read, "He said 12 would remain. And now we are 11. I will not be the 10th. The town whispered, but no one investigated. Not seriously. The church vestry appointed a nervous young curate, Reverend Edwin Glass, to oversee services until a permanent replacement could be arranged. But no one ever stepped forward to take Bell's place. Not really. Glass was not cut from the same cloth. He trembled when speaking from the pulpit. He refused to enter Bell's study, which remained locked indefinitely. Within weeks, the congregation thinned. Families who had once fought for front-row pews began attending services elsewhere. Some left Morhaven entirely. And then strange things began happening during services. Lights dimmed inexplicably. The floorboards near the altar vibrated. One parishioner swore she saw Bell standing in the balcony shadows, his silver hair glowing, his eyes dark hollows. But when others turned to look, no one was there. Reverend Glass began sleeping in the rectory with a Bible under his pillow. He would not last the year. By the autumn of 1856, St. Sylvester's Cathedral had transformed from Morhaven's crown jewel to a place of silent dread. The heavy wooden doors no longer groaned open each morning. Candles in the sanctuary refused to stay lit for more than an hour, and the air inside, once perfumed with incense and magnolia, now carried the subtle rot of something long dead, yet not at rest. The new curate, Reverend Edwin Glass, tried to keep up appearances. He hosted Sunday Mass, baptized babies, offered funerals with trembling hands and sweat-slick robes. But he never once set foot in Bell's old study. The key had been hidden. The room was spoken of only in euphemism, the late Reverend's quarters, or the South Vestry, but late-night visitors still swore they saw its window aglow. The faint shadow of a man pacing, writing, waiting. Glass began keeping a journal. His first entries were mild, descriptions of a dwindling congregation, notes about scripture selections. Then something shifted. October 3rd, heard breathing behind me as I extinguished the nave lanterns. Turned. No one. October 9th, communion wine curdled mid-service. I hadn't uncorked it yet, smell like rust and lavender. October 15th, dreamed I was in the crypt. Bell was there, said, "The circle is broken, it must be closed." October 18th, I found 12 teeth under the altar, human, polished, arranged in a crescent. He stopped writing on October 22nd. That was the day he collapsed during morning service, screaming, "He's still here," before convulsing at the pulpit. Glass was taken to a rest home in New Orleans. He never returned to Morhaven. His replacement lasted 3 weeks before resigning, citing a presence in the church that mocks prayer. Meanwhile, the townspeople began reporting odd occurrences near the cathedral. Children said they heard music from the bell tower at night, a slow organ hymn, though the pipes had been sealed. A cobbler across the street swore he saw Bell standing beneath the spire during a thunderstorm, head bowed, hands dripping red. A postman claimed he delivered a letter addressed to Bell, with no return address, postmark, or handwriting known to any living man. The building began to breathe. The walls flexed. The pews creaked without touch. And no matter how many times they were scrubbed, 12 perfect bloodstains reappeared on the chapel floor every Sunday morning. Bell may have disappeared, but he had never left. By the winter of 1856, it became clear that something, or someone, was maintaining the rituals Reverend Bell had begun. Despite the congregation's collapse and the clergy's rotation like a revolving door of frightened men, St. Sylvester's financial records remained immaculate. Tithes arrived weekly, in cash, always in precise sums, $127, the exact amount of Bell's former monthly salary. No one ever saw who left it. The collection box was always locked, yet the money always appeared. With the money came notes, short, eerie missives, handwritten in crimson ink that shimmered oddly under lamplight. The paper was old, watermarked from a mill that had closed decades prior, and the handwriting matched no one alive. Not perfectly, but old records showed that the slant of the cursive and the hooked lowercase g bore an uncanny resemblance to Bell's. The work is not done. The pact was blood. The debt remains. The choir of 12 must sing again. The vestry, what remained of it, refused to acknowledge the notes publicly, but Lydia Mornell kept them. She stored them in a tin lockbox beneath her bed, marked only with the word witness. Years later, a young semin, Ari student she befriended, claimed to have seen the box. He said one note simply read, "The 10th will awaken in blood, the 11th will drown in salt, the 12th must offer willingly." That winter was the coldest in Morhaven's recorded history. Pipes burst, wells froze, and the cathedral's stone walls began to crack with frost. Except Bell's study. That room remained warm, too warm, as if something inside it breathed steadily, like lungs pushing air through the vents. One night, a desperate churchwarden pried open the study door. It had not been touched since August. Dust clung to every surface, except the desk. The Bible, still open to Leviticus 17, had fresh blood between its pages. A new letter rested on top. The altar calls, 12 fell, 1 rose. Gather them again. The cycle must close before the frost breaks, or all are forfeit. The warden never spoke again. He lived another 40 years, never uttered another word. January 1857. Morhaven was paralyzed beneath 3 inches of frost, an unnatural stillness locking the streets in silence. Even the river slowed, its icy skin cracking like bones under pressure. Nothing moved, not the mail coaches, not the weather vanes, not the people, except those who felt compelled. On the evening of January 23rd, gas lamps along the cathedral square flickered to life without human hand. Bells rang from the tower, 13 chimes, though the clapper had been removed months ago. Townsfolk, roused from sleep by the sound, reported strange phenomena. Frost melting only in the direction of St. Sylvester's, family portraits falling from walls, candles flaring to life in sealed attics. At precisely 10 p.m., the cathedral doors swung open. No one opened them. Witnesses claimed the air rippled as if pulled back by invisible hands. Inside, hundreds of candles glowed. The organ played a low chord. A service was beginning. They came. Not out of faith, but obedience. Dozens of men, former vestry members, estranged merchants, old money aristocrats, all dressed in black, their faces pale with something more than cold. They moved as if summoned, as if Bell's voice still echoed in the marrow of their bones. Lydia Mornell watched from a second-story window across the square. She recorded it in her journal. They filed into the pews in silence. No one spoke. The air inside flickered. There were no words from the pulpit, no preacher. And yet, they bowed their heads, as though in unison with something unseen. At the altar stood a man, tall, robed in crimson and black, face veiled. He lifted a book, not the Bible, and read in a language no one could name. The notes were guttural, rhythmic, and felt wrong to the ear, like hearing scripture played backward. 12 men rose from the pews, one by one, and approached the altar. Each knelt. Each was touched lightly on the head with a silver dagger. Each wept. And then, one by one, they stood, turned, and walked out. Lydia wrote. The last man turned back. His veil slipped. I saw his eyes. It was Bell. Alive or reborn, I cannot say. But the man who vanished in August now led the dead in winter. The cathedral sealed itself at dawn. And from that day forward, the frost never returned to Morhaven again. 3 weeks after the frost-bound service, a package arrived at the Morhaven Historical Registry. No return address, no postage, just a bundle wrapped in worn linen and sealed with wax. Inside was a single item, a leather-bound ledger, its cover cracked, its pages brittle. It was titled, in faded ink, Registry of the Anointed 12. The first page contained a simple inscription, Through blood we bind, through silence we reign. There were 13 names listed, 12 in a circle and 1 in the center, Alaric Bell. Each name bore a date, a place, and a brief phrase written in what appeared to be Bell's hand. Percival Orval, initiated through confession of judicial extortion. Bennett Holloway, bound through sacrifice of inheritance. Lucian Halbrook, secured via anatomical procurement. Nathaniel Kane, inducted after the Harbor Master trial. Gideon Mars, debt cleared through ledger erasure of St. Luke's. Daniel Reeves, blood-spilled oath during rail contract fraud. Simeon Bellamy, acquired via the drowning of 4 Irishmen. Thaddeus Lorne, initiated during the cholera mass burial. Silas DeWitt, tied through poisoning of the poorhouse well. Francis Grigg, named in the fire insurance swindle. Wallace Penn, admitted by silent vote after the famine riot. Malcolm Reed, offered blood during the Ash Street betrayal. Beneath the list, written in crimson ink that still shimmered. Of the 12, 3 have fled, 4 have broken, 5 remain. But the circle holds, it always holds. Until the debt is cleared, the door stays open. The ledger was filled with ritual notations, diagrams of symbols, phases of the moon, and what appeared to be sacrifice schedules. But it also contained something more disturbing. Passages written for descendants. Each man's bloodline was traced, annotated, children, grandchildren, promises, warnings. Some entries bore dates from after Bell's disappearance. Who wrote them? One theory, quietly passed among historical archivists. Bell never left. He transcended. The ledger was not just a record, it was a living document. The names within weren't simply men. They were vessels, and the pact, it didn't end with them. It passed on. Lydia Mornell, upon reading the ledger, locked herself in her home for 3 days. When she emerged, she handed the book to the new curate and said, "You should burn this, but you won't." He didn't. He stored it in the cathedral's crypt. It has never been seen again. By 1860, just 4 years after Reverend Bell vanished, whispers began to surface about those born to the 12, children and grandchildren marked not by wealth or title, but by something else, something older. The first was Jonah Orval, son of the judge. Bright, well-mannered, but with eyes that never blinked in sunlight. Teachers at the Morhaven Academy claimed Jonah would recite Latin prayers in his sleep, not the kind taught in school, but archaic invocations written in long-dead dialects. He was 8. Then came Elsie Holloway, born in blood after her father's midnight departure. As an infant, she screamed every time the cathedral bells rang, even when she was miles away. Her nanny claimed the child refused to be baptized. The water boiled, she swore. No one believed her. One by one, the descendants of the covenant displayed behaviors that couldn't be explained. An aversion to churches, compulsive counting, unexplained fever during full moons, and violent fits on August 23rd. Physicians blamed nerves, inherited melancholia, bad blood, but servants whispered of deeper causes. In 1863, a young deacon named Willoughby Langston, newly arrived from Georgia, began investigating the pact, and he charted the birth records, family trees, and death dates tied to the 12. What he found disturbed him so much he packed up within the week and vanished. But not before he left a note, found tucked inside a psalter in the church library. Each child bears the cost. Each generation bleeds a little more. It is not a curse, it is a ledger, and the debt grows with time. Most of the 12's families left Morhaven by the end of the Civil War. Some changed their names, others moved west or disappeared entirely. Yet reports followed them. Strange deaths, disappearing children, family estates burned under mysterious circumstances, and always, somewhere in the background, a whisper of Bell. Lydia Mornell, now in her 50s and long retired from the cathedral, kept careful watch. She claimed to have seen Bell's eyes in more than one descendant. "He's inside them," she told her neighbor once, "not just as memory, as presence." Her final letter before her death in 1872 was addressed to the Morhaven diocese. It read, "The bloodline remains. I have seen the signs. The pact was not broken. It was multiplied." The letter was never answered. It was placed, without ceremony, in the vestry archives. Filed under unsolicited claims. Few in Morhaven knew the cathedral had a second basement, a crypt older than the church itself. Originally part of a Spanish mission, the lower levels had been sealed sometime in the late 1700s after reports of groundwater seepage and unsafe structures. But locals had always whispered about what was truly down there. An ossuary, a ritual chamber, a prison for the damned. In 1876, a fire tore through the cathedral's west transept. It was small, quickly extinguished, but during restoration, a mason named Hector Raines uncovered a narrow stairwell behind a false wall, cold stone steps leading down into darkness. Against orders, he descended. What he found shook him so deeply, he left town the next day and never returned. A single note was found in his tool bag. 13 niches, 12 occupied, the 13th waiting. Church officials denied everything. The basement was resealed, the stairwell bricked up again, but rumors swelled. There were relics, robes, chalices, that someone, or something, had been buried alive, that Bell's body had finally been found, and that he had not decayed. Years later, in 1899, an anonymous donor paid for an independent survey of the cathedral's foundations. The resulting diagrams revealed oddities, hollow spaces beneath the altar, passageways that didn't align with the floor plan, and most unsettling of all, heat signatures in areas that should have been sealed stone. That same year, 4 choir boys went missing. Only one returned. The boy, 9-year-old Thomas Elber, was found crouched near the cathedral's east wall, eyes rolled back, muttering something over and over. "He's not resting. He's watching." Thomas never spoke again. New clergy arrived in waves, most staying no longer than a year. Those who did remain developed a tremor in their hands, an aversion to darkness, and a marked obsession with obscure scripture. Several committed suicide. One walked into the river with stones in his pockets. The crypt was never officially reopened. But late at night, groundskeepers still report hearing movement beneath the sanctuary. The scrape of stone, a whispered chant, or the echo of a voice praying in a language no one living speaks. And sometimes on storm-racked nights, the drainpipes gurgle not with water, but with laughter. Bell's laughter. In 1906, Morhaven's cathedral archives were transferred to a new location, a brick annex near the cemetery. Mold and silverfish had damaged many of the older documents, and the diocese ordered a full inventory. The task fell to Elias Warren, a 34-year-old archivist from Montgomery with no knowledge of St. Sylvester's past. For months, Warren cataloged hymns, vestry minutes, parish records. Then, tucked behind a decaying catechism guide from 1855, he found it, a thick black folio marked with a single red symbol, a dagger piercing a circle. Inside were sealed pages tied with twine. Some were letters in Bell's handwriting. Others were written by the 12. Most were pleas. We cannot continue. He asks more with every moon. He knows our children's names. But the last document stopped Elias cold. It was written not in ink, but in dried blood. The language was foreign, twisted Hebrew, some Latin, some older script even scholars would call lost. But scrawled beneath it in English was a final passage. By the 13th blood shall the gate be closed. By the 13th soul the circle ends. Should any descendant complete the rite, the shadow will lift. Elias began to dig. He traced names from the ledger, sought out living heirs. What he found chilled him. Only one line remained intact. One bloodline had never broken, never scattered. The descendant of Reverend Alaric Bell himself, an illegitimate son hidden by the diocese, raised under another name. The current descendant lived in Morhaven, a young schoolteacher named James Alder. Mild, unmarried, quiet. He had been adopted. The papers had been sealed, but Elias found them. He visited James one stormy night, clutching the folio. What they discussed has never been known. But within weeks, James quit his job, sold his belongings, moved into the cathedral's rectory, which had stood empty for decades. He wrote to no one, was seen by no one, yet the bells resumed. Every Sunday at midnight, they rang 13 times. No hand pulled the rope. Lights burned in Bell's old study. A voice, calm and commanding, could be heard reading scripture behind sealed doors. And a new name appeared in the parish ledger, in crimson ink, unmistakable and clear. James Bell Alder, keeper of the gate. The last entry in Morhaven's diocesan records under the Bell Alder file is dated August 23, 1913, 57 years to the day since Reverend Alaric Bell vanished. That night, a storm rolled through the valley, unlike anything in living memory. Witnesses described thunder without lightning and hail that fell only around the cathedral, forming perfect rings on the cobbled square. Inside, James Bell Alder stood alone at the altar of St. Sylvester's. No congregation, no clergy, no choir, just him, the 13th descendant. He wore a crimson robe, the same robe Bell was said to have worn the night he disappeared. On the altar sat a single silver chalice, a dagger with an ivory hilt, a mao, and the black folio that had started it all. Candles flared to life by no human spark. The air in the cathedral shimmered with heat and ice, and from the crypt below, faint echoes of chanting began, voices that had not breathed for half a century. Lydia Mornell's niece, Miriam, now a woman in her 30s, watched from the back of the cathedral, hidden beneath the choir loft. She had followed the signs. She had read her aunt's journals, and what she saw that night she recorded in a letter sealed for 50 years. James spoke not as a man, but as a vessel. His voice had layers, his own and others behind it. He recited names, 12 of them. With each, a candle extinguished itself. When he came to the 13th, he spoke not a name, but a phrase. Through my end, it ends. He drove the dagger into his own chest, not with hesitation, but with conviction. Blood filled the chalice. Thunder cracked, and the voices stopped. The wind outside died instantly. The cathedral fell silent. Miriam ran. By morning, the altar was clean. No blood, no dagger, no James Alder. The only sign anything had occurred was the parish ledger, now open to a new page. Covenant closed, circle broken, gate sealed. No further strange events were recorded at St. Sylvester's. The bells never rang again at midnight. The frost never returned. No more whispers in unknown tongues. The crypt below remained sealed. Concrete poured, bricks layered 5 thick. And yet, each August 23rd, fresh flowers appear at the base of the altar. 12 white lilies, and 1 rose, blood red. No one knows who leaves them. But every year, they bloom, even when cut, even in darkness. The past, it seems, never dies. It waits, quietly, until someone opens the gate again